say that we've got proteins that only reside on one side of the membrane, and we call those peripheral or extrinsic. They'll have hydrophilic surfaces because the cytoplasm and the extracellular fluid are aqueous environments. And we've also got proteins that are completely embedded. They span the membrane, and we'll call those intrinsic or integral. We could also sometimes call them transmembrane. Just be aware of these possible names. And they will have both hydrophilic and hydrophobic regions. So obviously the hydrophobic regions are going to be those amino acids here that are in direct contact with what? With the hydrophobic core, the phospholipid tails, which are hydrophobic. So in order for that protein to actually be able to be embedded in the membrane, they will have to have some hydrophobic amino acids right there. Hydrophobic amino acids. They will also have to have some hydrophilic amino acids, so the ones that are actually pointing outwards to the extracellular fluid or the cytoplasm. What do membrane transport proteins actually do? They span the entire membrane, as we said, and so they'll be known as transmembrane, integral proteins. We've got two main types of transport proteins, and one are channel proteins, and they will have a fixed shape, and they will have a water-filled or aqueous, you can say, pore, which allows specific molecules to cross. These specific molecules are most of the time going to be polar. But also, sometimes channel proteins will not allow any polar molecule to pass through. They'll have some specificity about which exact types of molecules they allow. So this, for example, here is showing us an open pore here of a channel protein. And of course, we're going to see in a minute that they are mainly involved in facilitated diffusion. We then also have carrier proteins, and carrier proteins, in terms of function, they can be fairly similar. Sorry, I don't know why this is not pressing. Okay. They won't have a fixed shape. They will have to undergo conformational changes. The reason why this is in bold is because it's a typical keyword, and it's a good idea to try to utilize it when making your answers, when structuring your answers. They also move specific molecules across the membrane. Note that carrier proteins may be involved in either facilitated diffusion or active transport, whereas channel proteins are only involved in facilitated diffusion. Let's have a look at a typical exam question. We are shown a diagram. So basically, my context here is this diagram. It's my context. Figure 1 shows a typical cell surface membrane with 4 membrane proteins labeled. Proteins B and D transport substances across cell membranes. Further illustrating the context here that we're talking about transmembrane proteins. Identify proteins. This is my command word here, of course. We said this is the entire diagram, and this description is our context, and we are, sorry, just change color. So our command word here, of course, is going to be identify and state whether they are extrinsic or intrinsic proteins. So that'll be my direction here. And it's only a 2 marker, so that's going to be a relatively straightforward answer. So first of all, I'm looking at their structure. I'm looking at B. I'm looking at D. I can see that they span the entire membrane. So my answer, name integrate. So my answer is going to be that they are, that they are both, or I can just start my answer by identifying them actually. So B is a channel protein. How do I know that? How do I know that it's a channel and not a carrier protein? Because I can see that it has this kind of lumen or pore here. And I can see that this is kind of like just open. Whereas if I look at my protein D, I will call that is my carrier protein. And how do I know that? Because I can see that part of my protein down here is sort of closed and it's open towards the outside. So typically what this carrier protein is going to do is a substance that needs to be transported is going to bind up here to the open side. The protein will then undergo a conformational change. It will open the other way, basically, and then the substance can be released into the inside of the cell. So 1 mark goes for identifying them. B is channel, correctly identifying them, of course, right? B is channel, D is carrier protein. That's my 1 mark. And then both are intrinsic proteins because they span the membrane. We don't need to justify why, I'm just telling you. Proteins. Of course, here I'm calling them intrinsic and not integral or transmembrane because that's the phrasing that I'm being given in the question here.